So this is 1 Corinthians 2, the scripture for the 5th of March. Now, when I was in high school, I would regularly talk about God with a friend from the LDS Church. At that time, the LDS Church was still being called Mormons, although I hear that they would appreciate more being called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the LDS Church now. That's not important. But this friend of mine and I, we would talk regularly about God. And we had different perspectives on God because the LDS Church has a different set of beliefs than many Protestant or Catholic churches. One big difference is the LDS Church doesn't buy the idea of the Trinity. And so many of our discussions would turn into debates, or would turn into ways where we would try to one-up one another or show the other person why, they should really believe what we believed, because, we were high school boys. But what my friend would regularly do is he'd regularly bring up the Trinity and say, "You don't understand this. Why do you believe it? We don't have anything like that in the LDS Church," he would say. And I don't know their theology enough to know whether or not that's true, but I do know that stuff like the Trinity feels impossible to understand as Christians. It was hard for me to answer his questions, and it would still be hard for me to answer his questions now when I have theological training. There's something important, though, about having a God that's beyond comprehension. And this is a little bit what Paul gets at in the second chapter of 1 Corinthians. There are many dogmas in Christianity that don't seem to make a whole lot of sense, no matter how wise someone is. Even if you know everything there is to know about Scripture, it's hard, if not impossible, to demonstrate or to prove the resurrection or the Trinity or the virgin birth. Paul's strategy when he spoke with the Corinthians, and one of the things he says in this letter, was to make sense of everything by starting with Jesus Christ and Him crucified, not assuming anything else, but starting just at that point, and then trying to figure out what that implied, and working with the Corinthians to get them to buy into that. If you can build your entire house of faith on that cornerstone, then you'll be able to trust in that house of faith. This is more or less what Paul means when he talks about speaking through the Spirit or about spiritual things. That instead of basing a system of beliefs on the common assumptions that we have in this world, that Paul's faith rests on Jesus Christ alone and not what the world sees as wise. We can only grasp the truth of the good news, those things that are spiritual, if we make the assumption that Jesus Christ is the ground and foundation of all truth. Otherwise, none of our faith makes sense. But Paul goes further still. Not only is this assumption integral for making sense of the Christian faith, but those who make this assumption are able to free themselves from scrutiny that folks who don't make this assumption might give them. And this seems at first a little chauvinistic, a little, exclusivistic of Paul, that he would say, well, we as Christians, you can't judge us. But I think more what he's saying is that if I have this as my starting point, and you have this as your starting point, we're not going to come to the same conclusion. It wouldn't make sense because we're assuming different things. And if you start with the assumption of Jesus Christ crucified, then you're going to come to different conclusions than someone who starts with a very different assumption. So I wonder, how do you keep Jesus and His crucifixion front and center in your life? What's your practice to do that? That's all for 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Tomorrow, March 6th, we'll look at 1 Corinthians chapter 3. May God bless you in your reading of Scripture.